Sam Seder and Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome back to the program Murtaza Hussain. He is a journalist covering national security and foreign affairs at Dropsite News. And he has written, alongside with Ryan Grimm over at Dropsite, now a 4-part series. Is it going to be longer than this? Murtaza, you can answer that, about Jeffrey Epstein and his, I'm not sure how, it's so expansive, it's hard to describe it. His odd role in relationship to Israel and Israeli officials and their selling of weapons all around the globe.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on, because just this subject is so important and something which has been talked about so much in the media the last few days, but really the crux of the matter has not really been addressed, which is the fact that Epstein, as we're showing in this series, which is an ongoing series, was somebody who was very much involved in global politics, you could say. He was a fixer and deal maker. The 4 stories we've done so far, they show Epstein involved in helping seed or you could say orchestrate back-channel diplomacy between the Israeli government and other governments. And the ones we've done so far include Cote d'Ivoire, Syria, and Russia. And we have several other stories, and almost like Mongolia as well, too. And we have several other stories coming out, I think, in the next few weeks, which will touch on other countries as well. But yes, Epstein was somebody who was very involved in the global arms trafficking trade, the tech, surveillance technology, the profusion of it the last few decades. Obviously, sex trafficking is known, but and many other things, money laundering as well, too. And we're going to dig deeper into that in the months and weeks to come.
Can you back up a little bit to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell's father's connections to Israeli intelligence? Because I think that might be important to understanding, and the arms trade more broadly, to understanding like what Epstein kind of got himself into via this partnership with Maxwell, his daughter.
Right. So Robert Maxwell was somebody who had a very interesting relationship, you could say, with intelligence services. He was sort of an asset to them. He was a very wealthy individual, and he used his connections to play, again, a role as sort of a fixer and someone who could deploy capital for various purposes, which were useful to foreign governments, especially Israel. And, this is something which is speculative in a way, but it's very logical, it seems, that almost that Epstein, upon Maxwell's death, he sort of inherited that role. And when we've seen in a number of different disclosures, I will say there's 3 so far major sources of information about Epstein that we have gotten recently. One is the House oversight documents, which are being released at the moment. The other are some documents from a lawsuit between the U.S. Virgin Islands and J.P. Morgan, alleging that Epstein was involved in J.P. Morgan, and that helped facilitate sex trafficking. And finally, a cache of emails between former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Epstein. And they show Epstein acting a lot like Maxwell did, basically acting as a fixer for Israeli government officials, helping them secure both economic and political interests in foreign countries. And there's a particular model that Epstein appeared to operate on with Barak, whereby the two of them, or often Barak coached by Epstein or guided by Epstein, would approach a foreign country that had security problems and offer them a range of possible solutions, usually involving surveillance technology and other military cooperation, which could be provided by Israeli private firms, which were in fact linked to Israeli intelligence. And once those non-diplomatic commercial and security arrangements start to form, a few years later, the Israeli government would often go in and sign a formal security agreement with that country. That's what happened in Cote d'Ivoire. That's what happened in Mongolia. That's what happened in many other places. And Epstein was somebody who I would say, in my opinion, he had more contacts with people around the world, influential people in government and business and so forth, than any one person could really develop or manage organically. He was a central node to so many people in so many parts of the world. In Africa, he had huge connections in the Middle East, in Israel, in Europe, Russia, Central Asia, obviously the United States as well, too. He was at the center of all of it, and he would open doors and make these things happen. And that was really the role he played. And this is not to diminish the importance of his involvement in sex trafficking and the abuses that he was ultimately arrested for. But it seems almost only one part of the full story of who Epstein really was.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to reiterate that point that you just made at the end there, because this is not about diminishing it, but it is his role in the world is fascinating, and it's becoming more and more clear. And it also, what this stuff shows me, and then I want to get into sort of a little bit more of the specifics, but that he was the idea that he was working for the Mossad, I think, would be a mistake to sort of say that. It makes it sound like he was sort of like subservient, like they were his employee. Like it sounds more like he is a broker, and the idea of these things being discrete things, like this is his job or that's his job, because it sounds like that he's more of like a broker in this stuff, which isn't to say that he isn't providing all sorts of information, Mossad, but it sounds like he's almost more senior level in which he's engaging in. And that, to the extent that information gets to the Mossad, it gets through other members of the Israeli government and God knows how many other governments. But let's, you can speak to that as we talk about the story. But your first story was in September 28th, and you referenced the cache of emails between Ehud Barak and Epstein. Where did those come from? Like the emails we're seeing now came from his estate via subpoena by the Congressional Oversight Committee. Where did those first emails come from?
Yeah, so our first story in September, as you mentioned, about this Israeli security agreement with Mongolia that Epstein was involved in helping put together. That information came from this hacked cache of emails from Ehud Barak. Now, these emails were hacked, it seems like some years ago. The majority of them are between 2012, 2016, and there are a few after that, but the majority of them came from around that time. We don't know exactly who hacked them, but it was claimed by this pro-Palestinian hacking group called Handala, which others have speculated may have had ties to the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence. Again, we're not totally sure, but they were dumped online, and then they were picked up by this organization called Distributed Denial of Secrets, and it's like a successor organization to WikiLeaks, and they have different dumps of data and emails from hacks and leaks all over the world. They're hosted on there. Anyone can go look at them. You can go download them and take a look at them and so forth. And they contain thousands and thousands of emails, like 50,000 emails roughly from Barak, and a few other Israeli officials at the time were also hacked. But in those emails, a subset of them are Barak's communications with Epstein. Now, Barak, people probably know he was Israeli defense minister. He was Israeli prime minister at one time. And these emails are mostly from the period of right when he was about to resign as defense minister of Israel. And then,
okay, just so people know, he was prime minister. I mean, he was in the military, obviously, in Israel. He was a general, I think a fairly well-decorated Israeli general, became prime minister, was relative to sort of like Israeli politics, probably like, sort of like a moderate, maybe within the context of Israeli politics, sort of like left of center, but, that's Israeli politics are pretty far to the right. Then became, after he left office, he became defense minister, and then sort of like became, I don't know, a private defense minister, for lack of a better term, right? It's like just heading out and almost like just paying the people who are getting paid by the people, or selling to the people who who followed him.
Yeah, it's funny, like in the Israeli political spectrum, so Ehud Barak is derided like an extreme leftist or something, which is not really the case, but that's the way he's positioned, given how things have moved in that direction. But yeah, so, effectively what Barak was doing, as we can see in the emails, is what a lot of American political officials also do, which is that when they leave public office, they try to find ways to make money. They want to make money as private citizens. And we can see in the communications that Epstein was seen by Barak as somebody who could help open doors to make him rich now that he's leaving his defense ministry role in 2013. He actually thanks Epstein in one email. They talk about money pretty much all the time. He thanks him in one email for helping him make a lot of dough, quote unquote. That was a very explicit part of their relationship, but they're also very good friends, and they talk about a lot of things. But Epstein was helping Barak accomplish two goals at once. First was to help take his nascent sort of consultant role off the ground and help him make these connections with foreign countries who would pay him, and foreign banks would help to give him finder's fees to find them clients and so forth. But in doing so, those connections and those deals that Barack was making would also help further the security interests of Israel and Israeli intelligence, because what he would do is he'd pitch these Israeli-linked intelligence firms and surveillance firms to foreign countries and foreign governments as a turnkey solutions to their security problems. And then they would sign these lucrative deals with these Israeli firms, which are almost always founded by veterans of Israeli intelligence. So, as you said, Barack was kind of acting as an unofficial sort of, maybe defense minister is the wrong word, but someone who was operating for the benefit of the Israeli government, Israeli security establishment, and so forth, while also being free to make money. And Epstein was helping him do both those things. He didn't have all the connections Epstein did, which is funny because he was the prime minister. He was the defense minister.
This what's so bizarre about this is like, how is a seemingly random civilian opening up more doors than a former prime minister of really of any country you would imagine? Like, they'd be able to, like, it's nuts. It almost feels like Epstein is opening doors in the Israeli government too, on some level, to Barack, but it's so strange.
Yeah, that's the thing. People have asked this question for a long time. Did Epstein work for Mossad? And I totally agree with you, Sam. I don't think he worked for Mossad at all. If anything, it seemed like the Mossad was working for him.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And in the interactions between Barack and Epstein, it's really notable. I've spent a lot of time looking at the emails. There's a clear power dynamic here. And Barack, mind you, at that time was one of the most influential, powerful people in the Israeli political and security establishment. He was looking up to Epstein. It was by no means that Epstein was going after him or trying to get his attention. It was really vice versa. He was eager for Epstein's attention and help and so forth, and as a mentorship, you could say. And Epstein, like I said, he had deep connections and ability to draw influence very much in Africa, very much in the Middle East, very much in Central Asia, Europe, Russia, all these places. There's also some documents were released as part of that lawsuit I mentioned earlier, the J.P. Morgan U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit. In those documents, Epstein is talking about getting clearance to meet like foreign ministers of pretty much every country you can imagine in the Middle East, to have discussions about various matters, economic matters, and so forth. I don't know. He's also talking about meeting Putin. He helped arrange, we reported on this, he helped arrange a meeting and back channel between Ehud Barak and top Russian government officials to discuss a deal to remove Bashar al-Assad from power in 2013. He had unbelievable sway and pull. How he developed that, there's some theories about that. I don't think anyone really knows for sure. But by all means, he was somebody far more powerful than Barack, I would say, and the public officials of most countries. And he was sort of a free agent. He had clear ideological sympathies in certain ways. He had ties to some countries more than others. And some of that is reflected in our reporting, especially related to Israel. But he was somebody who was in many ways more powerful than all those people. And I don't think that, I also tell people, I think Israelis are also victims of the situation. Ordinary Israelis are definitely victims of the situation because their country was being used as effectively a base by these people who were making a lot of money, and they were doing things which arguably were only in their own interest. Right. And Israel was like a sovereign sort of destination from which they could organize that.
But how about Epstein's relationship too with Adnan Khashoggi from the arms dealer known from obviously Iran-Contra too? I mean, I feel like that doesn't necessarily get reported on that much, or was that more Maxwell's connection?
No, it was definitely also Epstein's connection.
Yeah.
It's a very important point because, we're going to write about this more just to contextualize sort of the long history of Epstein. But, Iran-Contra was a very important step in the journey to Epstein becoming who he was and his friendship with Adnan Khashoggi and so forth. My impression is that Epstein was somebody, and he's talked about this, before he died, he bragged about this as well, too. He bragged about his connections to the global arms industry. But also, and he also mentioned diamonds and other things, but he also was somebody who was very involved in money laundering and sophisticated means of money laundering, which could be beneficial to foreign governments, foreign intelligence agencies, also American intelligence, the American government as well, too, when they wanted to fund certain activities but wanted to keep it away from public scrutiny. They could arrange sophisticated money laundering schemes. And Epstein seemed to be a master at money laundering. And Adnan Khashoggi was somebody who was very well known for his involvement in this kind of activity. There was an organization called the BCCI. It was a Pakistani-based bank many years ago, known to be very corrupt, had ties to Adnan Khashoggi, was involved in Iran-Contra. Epstein was very much in those circles, and he seemed to learn the tips of the trade doing it at that time. And he blossomed in later years to become a power player in his own right. I think one really important part is we know, certain snippets of Epstein's life. There's a period, around the time from like 2003 to 2010-ish, where his life is completely like a black box. We really don't know much of what he was doing at that time, but I strongly suspect he was very involved in the Iraq War and helping facilitate it, or conversations about, not saying he triggered it or anything like that, but he's somebody who was so deeply involved in every sort of major geopolitical enterprise of the U.S. and Israel and a few other countries that I would imagine that he had some involvement in that, such as he did in other later and previous episodes.
I mean, I have a lot of questions that may be sort of outside of your portfolio with this, because there are like the whole, sort of financial stuff that backs this too. I mean, at one point, maybe years from now, we will have a more holistic a vision of what is going on here, because it really is nuts that this guy is able to sort of like coordinate all these things. But I will say, there is a email going around in this latest trove where Epstein talks about Trump basically not just lending his name from a branding exercise, as a way of making money, but also being a Trojan buyer of a lot of stuff for wealthy people who wanted to launder their purchases. I mean, it has occurred to me, again, this is all speculation on my part. You've done a lot more reporting and digging into these things, that when in that birthday card, when he referred to them as both enigmas, I get the sense that that was about money laundering at the end of the day. I mean, I feel like that would be, it feels like Epstein would find a thing that he shared with these different people and then become this mentor, like Larry Summers asking how to, prey on, somebody who works for him.
But a mentor would imply that the relationship isn't coercive. I mean, he also had cameras and surveillance setups throughout his whole house. So, I mean, Murtaza, feel free to weigh in here, but like he recorded, it seems like a lot of incriminating information about
But it's unclear. I mean, from the email, Murtaza, weigh in on this, but I'm like looking at his Larry Summers stuff, and that does not seem like Larry Summers is afraid of Epstein. It seems like Larry Summers is like, I'm a loser. Can you help me score with this, person who's working for me? I mean, it's nuts. It's like what I feel like a 12-year-old would say to like, some junior in high school, like, dude, how do I, like, it's like Fast Times at Ridgemont High when the guy's saying, put on that Led Zeppelin album, sort of. But Murtaza, weigh in on this.
Yeah, to Emma's point, it's this issue of the blackmail. It's interesting because I think there's very strong circumstantial evidence and I think it's very plausible that was the case. I haven't seen a smoking gun as yet that he was doing that per se. But one thing we reported on is that at his the apartments that he was administering in New York, the ones he's renting or have control over, there was an Israeli senior Israeli military intelligence agent living there for stretches of that time, weeks at a time between 2013, 2015. So one can imagine what the reason for that is. But, and another aspect is that Epstein did have ties with Russian oligarchs. And we've also reported on parts of this. And they were well known to do this kind of thing. The whole compromat idea was sort of in some way pioneered by them. And there are some other emails which suggest, imply that this was going on. But I haven't seen a smoking gun per se. It's very plausible to me. But that said, I also think that a lot of these people, they didn't need to be blackmailed because they were willing to do what Epstein wanted anyways, because Epstein was somebody who, they wanted to be close to him because he was someone who could make you a lot of money. He could make you a very wealthy person if you have connection to him. He was someone who was the gateway to a lot of like fun, quote unquote. He could, open doors to parties and God knows what, social circles that are very elite and so forth. So I think that he probably used carrots and sticks, and I've seen a lot of carrots, but we haven't seen necessarily firm evidence that he was doing that, although I think it's not by no means beyond the realm of possible at all. But yeah, he was somebody who was also very charismatic, clearly. He had a magnetic sort of personality. Powerful people were dying to talk to him and work with him or have his attention and have his time and so forth. So, I don't know. That's a very, very important part of who he was and how he operated. And these emails, he was just chatting in a lot of them with powerful people. Like they were using him as a confidant or somebody who they wanted to, like Larry Summers is a great example. They wanted his help as an individual. So I don't know what the particular elite culture was where these things were being discussed or what role exactly he played socially in this way, but it wouldn't surprise me that a lot of people did what he wanted just because they wanted to, even if some of them were also being coerced.
I mean, we should be frank. I mean, some of our faves were involved. Chomsky has written about. Yeah. There's what seems to be some type of reference letter and where Chomsky talks about the access to insight and individuals in areas where Chomsky was he wanted to, it sounds like Epstein made, maybe it was Ehud Barak, it could have been other Israeli officials, so that Chomsky could sort of formulate his opinions and get an idea of what's actually going on, providing that type of access to somebody who wouldn't necessarily be able to sort of you don't imagine Chomsky having the opportunity, once he becomes such a full-throated critic, to be able to have access and insight from behind whatever, curtain that he has criticized. And it's like Epstein shows up and I'm like, I've got, you want reds? I got reds. You want blues? I got blues. I got uppers. I got downers. I got I got whatever it is that you want. It's like a weird world where this guy has all the information that people seem to be seeking from him. Now, of course, I'm not reading the emails that are just banal, but it seems really sort of fascinating. I guess the origin story is how it gives you a better sense of what this trajectory is, right?
Yeah, he made himself indispensable to so many people, seemingly. He was able to open doors for them and so forth. And, with Chomsky, it was fascinating because there are some emails between Chomsky, Epstein, and Ehud Barak in the separate disclosures, which, were not from the House Oversight Committee, were then Barak's emails. And it seemed like Epstein and Barak just, they saw Chomsky as this brilliant curiosity. And there's one very interesting email. We might report this later on, but there's an interesting email where they were discussing some criticisms that Chomsky had made about the trajectory of the Israeli government, Israeli society, and they thought, this is actually made some good points here, and they're discussing his article and wanting to meet up with him and so forth. So I get the impression Epstein really enjoyed being part of these rarefied academic intellectual circles. He saw himself as someone like that as well too, even if he didn't have any formal affiliation. He obviously had this famous affiliation with all these elite educational institutions, and Chomsky was a legendary figure in them. Even putting aside his political views, just as a linguist. So I think that they saw him as somebody who was someone who fit naturally into the social circle. And yeah, what Epstein was doing for Chomsky is really, it's hard to say. Maybe there's nothing, I don't know, but there could have been something as well too. But there was just something that there was a magnetism there that seemed to people want to be involved with him, and he could arrange funding for people. And we're going to be reporting about this later on. But people who are in academia and research and science, they need the funding for their projects and so forth. And he was somebody who's very well positioned to provide that, provided that there was something in it for him or he found it to be noteworthy or in line with his own personal or political interests.
Within the context of the Barak emails, were there other figures that you came across aside from Chomsky who ended up being mentioned in these emails as being within the sort of universe where Epstein operated?
A tremendous number of people all over the world. A lot of them, some of the known names are probably already known right now, but he just had such tremendous reach all over the world. A lot of them are people who may not be familiar to Americans, to be honest. People, these senior political figures in Africa and in the Gulf Arab countries, and mid-level figures or upper mid-level figures. He was hosting many of them. His house in New York was like an unaffiliated diplomatic embassy. It was a diplomatic embassy for some parastatal force, which he was the ambassador. That's kind of how he operated. So, it was kind of taken as a given that he would be somebody who would be helping facilitate official diplomacy, business deals. He's very involved in the world of private banks. We have a forthcoming story, hopefully in the next 24, 48 hours, about his involvement with a very famous private bank. He would use his relationships to accomplish discrete political ends. And, one thing Epstein would do is he'd always do two things at once. Because whenever he's trying to accomplish a political goal, there would always be a financial component tied into it as well, too. So it was a very, in some way, seamless system that he was sort of operating under. And yeah, he was somebody who was above all these governments. He seemed to represent a class of people who were above all these governments from all over the world. They knew each other. They invested together. It was not really a huge world of people, to be honest. And when you look at those photos that the New York Times released in his mansion, you see like he was with the Emiratis and Israelis and British people and Americans and Russians. He had a tremendous reach and tremendous influence. And, I think that it's just a little odd, actually. If you think of how did one individual who's a private citizen develop all that? Who did he work for? What influences did he represent? He certainly worked for himself, but, there's something beyond that as well, too. I think that, if I were to put a rough point at it, there's like a global billionaire class. And he is somebody who was a very important node in that global billionaire class. That's who I would say Epstein was in the short and sum of it. And alongside that, he had relationships with all these governments and intelligence agencies while not working for them per se.
Do we have a sense of like, I mean, the first thing that occurs to me is like, I just the sheer amount of social connections the guy has, business, social connections, whatnot. Like, I can't even like it. I just don't understand how that works. Like, when do you have time to do anything? And, but do we have a sense that there was any type of apparatus? Like, I know Ghislaine Maxwell was his number two and must have had a big portfolio, if you will. But part of that portfolio also seems to be sort of like organizing the sex trafficking. Like, here he is. You've written stories about him going to Cote d'Ivoire and to Mongolia and to Syria, and presumably he's got other clients. He's also seems to have a burgeoning money laundering business. Like, all these things coincide. They all seem to sort of like mix in with each other on some level. But is there any evidence of an apparatus? Like, has he BCC'd anybody? Has he CC'd anybody? Like, this is what I can barely organize what we're doing here. And I just don't understand how does he keep in his head, got to get to the Cote d'Ivoire because we're going to sell, this weapon system. But of course, we got this thing in Mongolia where we're going to do these security things. And I've got to, create a fake bank account in, I don't know, the Bahamas. Is there any sense that there's an apparatus that he's running, or who's doing the grunt work?
It's a really great to bring that point up, because if you look at schedules which are released as part of these House oversight disclosures, he had I don't know where he found the time to do the sex trafficking, actually, based on his schedules, because he was meeting people morning to night, traveling constantly. As he said, arranging these very intricate discussions, and very important sort of geopolitical back channels and so forth. It's very interesting. And his schedule was put together by his assistant, was a Graf at the time. They would sort of manage what he was doing day to day, per se. But you're right, it's difficult. An organization would need to usually do this much, and it'd be difficult for an organization to actually execute this much just bureaucratically, or keeping all this information together, keep all these different projects going at the same time. What, if anything, was managing that? I don't know. It's I can't say right now what was happening. He could have hired a staff. Supposedly, he did have a staff, a significant staff who worked for him. So he could have been an organization unto himself. But I completely agree with you that the nature of his lifestyle and his contacts and the way he managed them and so forth was inorganic, in the sense that no one individual could do all of this. No one individual could manage all these contacts, all these different projects, leaving totally aside the illegal sex trafficking he was involved in. Just his geopolitical maneuvering was seemingly far beyond the purview of any one individual. Maybe he was superhuman. Maybe he just did it himself. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think that it's just it wouldn't make a lot of sense. And yeah, he had a staff, but even then, something doesn't add up here. So, I'll say, whenever I talk about Epstein, I say that, this is a situation, it's like the analogy of the blind person and the elephant. Like, everyone is touching one aspect of the elephant, but no one sees the full elephant. We're all like, I'm touching one part, and then the New York Times is touching some part, which I find less relevant and so forth, and stuff like that. But, we don't have the full picture. And I hope that we do develop the full picture over time. But, it's going to take a tremendous amount of disclosure and attention and evidence and reporting dedicated to actually uncovering the full scope of who he was and what he was involved in.
Well, also the Maxwell thing, I just feel like is still underreported. Like, her role as being his number two, maybe not. There's a lot of focus, of course, on her basically recruiting these girls for him to abuse, and literally driving around schools in West Palm Beach and doing that. I mean, it's horrific. But as I mentioned earlier about Robert Maxwell and his ties to the arms trade and to Israeli intelligence, like, he died mysteriously in the middle of the ocean, got pushed off or fell off his boat. I think that was what happened. Maybe he didn't get pushed off.
Happens.
We don't know. It had lots of mysterious stuff happening around the story. But like, how much did Epstein take over? Ghislaine was his favorite, his baby daughter, the boat was named after her that I think that he died on. And it seemed like a lot of people that observed their relationship seemed like she replaced this very intense relationship with her father with Epstein. And it would make sense if he took over business contacts for Robert Maxwell, right?
But even still, I would imagine, hi, I'm that guy that you did that arms deal with. I'm his brother, and is like his stepson. So let's do this. That also just seems like click. I mean, like, but getting. I want you to address that, but getting back just to the staff thing, has anybody gone out and like attempted to sort of unwind or pull on the thread of any of the names that were working in the staff? Like, I would imagine there's got to be like NDAs, but the guy's dead. And unless there's some, like, why wouldn't you, even if you got paid off, which I would imagine they all got paid quite well, you would imagine that one of them would speak unless they were afraid of like there being some other way of, being some other mechanism to punish them for speaking out about it.
Yeah, there have been some limited sort of reporting, people who work with him, security people, assistants, people who worked on staff at his mansion. It has not been very substantive. Some of them have passed away, like, natural causes, I guess. But it's been what I would call kind of a limited hangout a little bit. The term, people may know that intelligence term. There've been like a little bit of reporting about all these things, but the thread has never fully unraveled the whole way. And it's not always clear how much any one individual may have known about this situation. But I do think, I'm a really important point, like take the one aspect of sex trafficking that Ghislaine was involved in. There are people who knew about that, and there are people in the staff who testified that they cleaned up at his mansion after these, abuses took place and so forth. Again, I don't know how Epstein learned how to do that, or decide to integrate that into his larger apparatus. One thing that does go back to Robert Maxwell, and beyond that is the ties to BCCI, because that bank, BCCI, which was this notorious global money laundering institution, they were very well known for sex trafficking, and they would traffic girls from Asia and South Asia to the Middle East, and that was part of their money laundering apparatus. It seemed like there's a class of people all around the world who were involved in this type of activity, whom Robert Maxwell was an integral part. And then by some means, it seems though that Epstein inherited, and this would just be a natural thing that they knew to do, or they knew that their clients, whoever they were, would demand this, or political expediency would demand this. And he just sort of was able to fulfill that role, given who he was and who his connections were and so forth. So, it's interesting because there are people who talk about this, and a lot of this stuff is public, and we are getting some disclosures about this. There's our reporting, there's a House Oversight Committee, victims of sex trafficking have testified, members of the staff has testified in the past, but it doesn't really, the whole thing does never get put together. Even these emails that are coming out right now, they're really interesting, but they're all like what individual, shotgun-like blasts in different directions, and the whole thing is not really put together in the cohesive whole. They're really shocking, like, implications in many of these emails, and shocking implications of things people have said in the past too. But what does it all add up to? That's the question which has not really been fully answered.
What from the email trove of Ehud Barak was the most shocking to you? I mean, was it a series of stuff like where you're like, oh my God, wait, what? And like, it feels like that could have been like a rolling experience of like, how is Epstein, like, dealing with the Russians in Syria, and then also going to, Mongolia, and like, it's just bizarre. But what did you find most sort of surprising or shocking?
Well, it's interesting because the emails are all there, and like anyone can look at them, but it's not obvious what are being said in the emails per se, because this is like a snapshot of a particular time in both men's lives. It doesn't account for when they first met. It doesn't account for, it's like you're joining the story mid-conversation in a way in a lot of these cases. So it's only really after putting together the thread of what they're talking about each of these cases that, you come to some revelation that something very significant was happening here. So it takes a lot of time to look at them to actually determine that. It's definitely doable. It's just, it's an investment of resources and so forth, which I guess is a barrier to just reporting them easily. It's not like low-hanging fruit per se, even though they are available. But, I think it's fascinating, the casualness of all this, actually, in a way, because, one would think that back-channel diplomatic conversations were handled through some sort of quasi-official channels and so forth. It was really often just certain individuals who were very plugged in, who were part of these elites organically, who arranged these talks, which Epstein was doing for Barak in many, many parts of the world. But I think that it's not shocking, but the most revealing email in there is one we've quoted several times in the story. And I think we'll continue quoting because it kind of tells the whole story in a way. It's one where Epstein just emails Barak out of the blue, seemingly. They just chatted very often with their friends. And he said, all over the world, in Somalia and Syria and Ukraine and all these places, there are this great upheaval, and people in power are very insecure and afraid. Isn't this perfect for you? And Barak responds, yes, but it's not easy to turn it into a cash flow, something for us to discuss on Saturday. So it seemed like the two of them were looking at the map of the world. Epstein had contacts pretty much everywhere, saying who's insecure, who needs help that we could provide them or sell them, and then using Barak as the guy who go do the pitch with Epstein and encouragement. So I think that email sort of is distilling the broader little operation they were running in this case. They were exploiting global upheaval as a means of making money, and then also furthering security interests of certain states, and particularly in this case, Israel.
It's hard because, this stuff really sort of pulls at that thing in your brain where you just want to go to like the most sort of like conspiratorial thing. But the way I saw that email, I mean, it's in your pieces, obviously. But it really feels to me like that is Epstein trying to get him on the hook. Like the idea of like, there's a lot of opportunity out there for you, buddy. And Barak is like, yeah, I know, but I can't make it happen. It sort of feels like that's Epstein's way of saying, well, I can help you make it happen. And then, there's this and this and this. And, like,
And Barack, we should say, it's heavily implied in Virginia Giuffre's, I believe, accounts that he might have been the prime minister that assaulted her. That's accurate, right?
Yeah, there's nothing about that in the emails per se, but I have seen that reporting, and I did see her statements about that. She said
Yeah.
a certain prime minister did that. I think the New York Post heavily implied it was him. I don't have any definitive information about that, but yeah, I
But
did see
just
that.
to say how woven, like all these financial dynamics are with the sex trafficking too. Sorry,
I
we're
would
going.
imagine like that's part of it. It's like, we're in this, dude. Like, we go hang out, we go to the strip club together on a regular basis, and us doing business, that type of like sort of dynamic where it's like we're all in on this, and it does that. Him emailing Barack out of the blue and saying there's a lot of opportunity out there seems solicitous to me in some way.
Yeah. So this is 2014. So they'd already known each other and been close for some years now, and they'd already done the deal or initiated the deal with Mongolia and Cote d'Ivoire, at least at this point, and other countries as well too. So they, to Emma's point, it's a really important point because all these communications, they don't talk about the sex trafficking aspect at all, so far as I've seen. But that's a subtext. We know it's happening. We know it's been going on. He'd been involved in that. He'd been convicted many, many years before that, the first time for that. So it's something which is an unspoken sort of additional layer in this onion that it does implicate the broader suggests a broader meaning behind their communications. And Epstein, if you look at the way he talks to different people, he talks to everyone sort of in a different way, so to speak. He kind of tells them not what they want to hear per se, but he would sort of project a certain image back at them, which was conducive to what their interests were, their desires were, and so forth. He definitely has a markedly different communication style with different types of people. So, it makes sense that in Barack's case, he helped make Barack a very wealthy person. And I think these emails show the whole process of that happening in a way. And, Barack, he had certain political inclinations, he had desire to make money, he had other things going on maybe. And his communication with Epstein seems to evince a knowledge of all that and how to continue to get him along that process.
Lastly, did it occur to you, like reading these emails, like what is this dude doing using Gmail for all this? Like it's sort of like, that's the other thing. It's like they're doing all this over like CompuServe or AOL. It just seems so like Epstein feels like he doesn't have to worry about anybody finding this stuff out because there's almost a sense of like, who are they going to report me to? Like,
yeah,
I'm untouchable. It sort of feels like
well, that was the lesson he also got out of this 2007 non-prosecution agreement, was like, just basically, I am untouchable, right? That would make sense and line up with this timeline, right?
Yeah, I think there was a great sense of impunity reigning at that time. Not to say that they wanted anyone to read his emails or thought maybe it was not impossible, but given the 2008 agreement, given a lot of things, and given the way he lived and the people around him lived, I don't think that they felt necessarily a great fear from the public or fear from accountability of any sort. So it's not just him who was using the Gmail, like Barack was using the Gmail, and other very powerful people, Americans and others, were using like AOL and Hotmail and so forth. This is 2014, 13, around that time, and these people from an older generation who may have been less acclimated at that time to the whole concept and so forth. But it was very cavalier. And I think if you look at the later communications, especially the House disclosures, which are more recent in time, 2019, 2018, like that, he does seem to become a bit more cagey. And he says more often that certain things should only be discussed on the phone and so forth. But he's still using his Gmail. He's still using that to communicate with these very powerful people. So, that's a
and we should say this is after, like, it's not like, like Petraeus got, I think he was, I don't know if he was convicted, but he was prosecuted because, they found that he was doing that draft thing with the Gmail where I think it was his girlfriend / reporter who was writing about him they would communicate by just sharing a Gmail account and writing back and forth just in drafts. So it was never actually even emailed out. And they still were able to find that. So it's not like, it's not like my dad going like, wait, what? They can look at AOL emails? Really? Like, the guy has some savvy. It's just as if he just thinks he has impunity on some level.
I think that sense of impunity kind of goes to, it's like a very important part of the whole story, because even the sex trafficking and the criminality and so forth, not just Epstein, but a lot of these people, they seem to believe that they were somehow above all sort of legality and morality and propriety and so forth. That's just the broader impression I get from their broader range of activities. Like even the use of an island and all the, spectacularly illegal and immoral things that are going on there. It just seemed like there's no way that anybody could possibly see what we're doing or stop us, or the idea of us being stopped is simply impossible. That's just a tremendous amount of hubris, I would say, which is in the emails, not just with Epstein, by the way, many, many other people. And when you get that level of hubris, you can make mistakes and you can become cavalier in a way which could be injurious later on. That's what they seem to be operating as, though. And I would say that I get the impression that culture still exists, and maybe Epstein was taken down for some reason, but that broader global elite culture, and you see it like all over the world, that's very, very much prevalent. And, this is just one glimpse into it, and who knows what's going on right now.
I think at the end of the day, that is probably like the biggest takeaway from this is the sort of, there is a cohort of people living amongst us, but they're not living amongst us. They are operating under an entirely different set of rules. And it explains a lot of times their decision making, because I think, more than anything else, at least in the context of the sex trafficking, these are not people who I think even contemplated the idea that like, well, I'm doing sex trafficking. I mean, I think they were aware that they could break laws, and there's some emails from Epstein that suggest, Dershowitz was getting information to see like what the specific laws were, but they clearly didn't look at these girls or women as, as human beings. They were just, these are all, and I think that across the board, it's like, we're humans and everything else is just sort of like things for us to exploit in some fashion. Murtaza Hussain, we will link to your pieces on DropSite. And look forward to more of these coming out. It is, there's so much to this story. And again, I think it really speaks to sort of an elite perspective on the world that we as just mere humans don't know much about it, but appreciate your time today.
Hey, thank you both for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.